Welcome back, focused learners. Ready for another explainer? Today, we're taking some pretty complex strategic ideas and making them clear, actionable, and visually intuitive. So, think about the global business landscape right now. It's kind of chaotic, right? Imagine trying to steer a massive cargo ship through this thick fog of sudden economic shifts, wild technological advancements, and, constantly changing laws. Honestly, it's a daunting task. But here's the thing. The most successful organizations, they don't just guess their way through the fog. They use precise analytical frameworks as their strategic compass. And in this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly how they do that. So that brings us right to this really vital question. How do you predict the unpredictable in business? The harsh reality is, businesses just can't control the massive external forces swirling around them. You literally cannot control a global pandemic. You can't control a sudden overnight shift in trade policies. And you definitely can't control a stock market crash. But, and our sources make this absolutely abundantly clear, while you can't control those forces, you absolutely must systematically scan them if you want to survive and avoid total strategic failure. All right, here is our roadmap, basically our syllabus for today. First, the strategic planning landscape. Second, defining environmental scanning. Third, an analytical frameworks overview. Fourth, unpacking PESTLE analysis. Fifth, variations of the framework. And finally, number 6, linking PESTLE to SWOT. Okay, let's dive into this with Section 1, the strategic planning landscape. Fundamentally, strategic planning splits the business world into two very distinct spheres. You've got the internal environment. Those are the things an organization actually has some direct control over, right? Like its company culture, human resources, internal structure, and physical assets. But then you have the external environment. We're talking climate, the broad economy, tech breakthroughs, political and legal forces. That is the Wild West. And for this explainer, we're going to focus entirely on how to make sense of that chaotic, uncontrollable external side. Moving to Section 2, defining environmental scanning. Our sources pull a really great quote from Azar Kazmi, who just perfectly summarizes this concept. He says, "The process by which organizations monitor the relevant environment to identify opportunities and threats to affecting their business is known as environmental scanning." The text strongly emphasized that because the business environment is so incredibly dynamic, this can't just be some one-off annual retreat exercise. No way. It has to be a fast, regular, and highly systematic process to actually ensure the long-term health of a corporation. Section 3, Analytical Frameworks Overview. So, to actually pull off this environmental scanning, managers rely on a specific set of tools. Think of this list like a museum tour of strategic analysis frameworks. We have the PESTLE analysis, Porter's 5 forces, the classic SWOT analysis, and the McKinsey 7S framework. Now, each of these exhibits has a very distinct, crucial role. I mean, you wouldn't use a hammer to drive a screw, right? Similarly, you wouldn't use McKinsey 7S, which specifically looks at internal company alignment, to analyze something like global trade tariffs. You have to grab the right framework for the right job. Just to really clarify this, let's draw a direct contrast between two specific external tools. PESTLE provides what the texts call a bird's eye view of the broad macro environment. It looks at massive global or national forces. On the other hand, a tool like Porter's 5 forces zooms way in on the micro environment. We're talking specific, day-to-day, industry-level competition, analyzing your direct suppliers, buyers, and rival companies. But today we are staying way up high with that macro bird's eye view. Which brings us to Section 4, Unpacking PESTLE Analysis. We're going to spend a good bit of time here. Now, what's really interesting about this breakdown is how it prevents total data overload. This framework takes the vast, completely chaotic universe of external forces out there and neatly categorizes them into 6 distinct buckets: political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental. Let's actually break down what lives inside these individual buckets. First up, the P and the E. Political factors include things like government term changes, current and upcoming legislation, and global trade agreements, like NAFTA, for example. And it's fascinating because these political choices almost immediately impact the economic factors right next door. Those are your macroeconomic trends: inflation, interest rates, and stock market conditions that ultimately dictate consumer spending power. Keeping the rhythm going, we move to S and T. Social factors include shifting demographics, population size, age distribution, and changes in consumer lifestyles and overall attitudes. Interestingly,
The source notes that while economic factors like inflation can be notoriously hard to predict, social trends, like a population generally getting older over a decade, are often much easier to forecast long-term. Then we have technological. In today's landscape, this changes rapidly. It's not just about getting new computers, it's about manufacturing maturity, overall innovation potential, and technical access through things like licensing and patents.
Finally, we finish the acronym with L&E. Legal focuses on the strict rules of the game, so employment law, health and safety regulations, and competition law. And then there's environmental. The texts make a great point here, noting that environmental factors originally weren't the main focus, but emerged as a very sensible addition to the framework once the business community really woke up to the material risks presented by physical climate changes. This tracks ecological issues, energy consumption, and the real impacts of waste disposal. Section 5. Variations of the framework. Now, if there is one thing academics and business consultants absolutely love to do, it's constantly rearrange and rename things. Depending on which specific elements a strategist wants to emphasize, PESTLE becomes a bit of an alphabet soup. Step, steep, slept, or lepist. Sometimes they even extend the whole shebang to steeple, tossing in an extra E for ethical factors, or even steepled, adding a D for demographics. But hey, don't let the acronyms confuse you. Regardless of how you arrange the letters, the core analytical goal remains identical. You are scanning the broad external environment.
Let's move on and see how this builds in Section 6, linking PESTLE to SWOT. So the absolutely crucial point here is understanding this funnel effect. PESTLE doesn't just exist in a vacuum. Step 1 is your PESTLE analysis. That's purely an external scan. Step 2 is filtering all that macro data to figure out what is actually helpful or harmful to your specific business. And Step 3 is taking those curated findings and feeding them directly into your SWOT analysis. Remember, the S and W in SWOT, your strengths and weaknesses, those are internal. But the O and T, the opportunities and threats, those come directly from the outside world. PESTLE is the tool you use to go find out what those opportunities and threats actually are.
Because ultimately, the core strategic goal relies on matching. On one side, you have your external industry analysis from tools like PESTLE. On the other side, you have your internal company capabilities. SWOT is where the magic happens, bridging those harsh macro realities with your internal strengths so you can formulate a genuinely winning strategy.
The main takeaway from all our sources really culminates in this one idea. PESTLE analysis encourages management into proactive and structured thinking in its decision-making. And why does structured thinking matter so much? Because honestly, environmental scanning can easily lead to massive information overload. Without a solid framework like PESTLE, you risk suffering from what the texts brilliantly call paralysis by analysis. This structure basically forces you to organize the chaos of the world into actionable intelligence. We're going to leave you with this final thought to ponder today. Take a mental step back from the day-to-day operations of your own job or business. Ask yourself, what external macro factors, whether it's a looming demographic shift, a crazy new piece of technology, or a changing environmental regulation, are silently shifting the foundation of your industry right now? If you use the PESTLE bird's eye view, you can spot those shifts early and you can actually turn those external threats into your greatest strategic opportunities. Thanks so much for joining us on this explainer, and keep learning.